Plasma bolts from alien weapons sizzled harmlessly against human skin and eyes, shocking the Daxamite soldiers, even as their weapons' blasts sheared uselessly off the humans' superior biology. The humans were supposed to be an easy conquest, not immune to plasma fire. George Simmons, a 35-year-old soldier, crouched in a foxhole on the war-shattered surface of Zeta Prime, a bombed-out husk of a once lush farming world. He popped up and drilled plasma into two grey-skinned Daxamites, hurling them backwards in sprays of neon blood. His rifle beeped a low power warning. 10% charge left, not enough to hold off their advance for long. George gritted his teeth and slammed the comlink again, but only static snarled. The Daxamites were jamming all frequencies, probably how the alien shock troops had ambushed his platoon in the first place. Now they were all dead, and he was alone, trapped. But the Daxamites didn't know human biology's secret weapon. Plasma couldn't burn humans like it could aliens. George had just watched comrades get vaporized by the same bolts that bounced harmlessly off him. It was humanity's only hope against an overwhelming alien invasion. Here on Zeta Prime, the secret had saved George's life. But across the stars, at the front lines of a dozen desperate battles, millions of human soldiers still fought and died, not knowing plasma couldn't hurt them. If word didn't spread in time, humanity would be slaughtered by weapons that couldn't kill them, for the simple lack of knowledge. George rose to his feet with savage defiance building in every sinew. He hurled his depleted rifle like a spear, impaling an alien through the chest. Time to let the Daxamites witness the unstoppable power of a human unchained. George bellowed a war cry and charged, a blur of primal human fury, as plasma fire sparkled uselessly off his skin like firecrackers. He was the vanguard of a new breed of warfare, but the rest of humanity would need to learn plasma immunity fast, or perish as the mightiest race to never discover their own potential. George leapt into the alien ranks like an avenging meteor, snapping limbs and pulping organs. They fell screaming around him like stalks of grey wheat, their greatest technology, impotent. When the alien sergeant rushed out, serrated knife in hand, George beckoned. He wouldn't just defeat this alien. He'd snap the bastard's neck, then march on their base and hijack their comms, broadcast the truth of plasma's impotence to every human. He met the sergeant's charge in a storm of shattering bone. One vicious twist, a crack of vertebrae. The sagging corpse dropped. George rolled his shoulders and turned his flinty glare planetward. Time to spread the word. Humanity's done being target practice, he grated out, and stomped into the ruins with tireless purpose. Humanity would learn the aliens' weapons couldn't hurt them, and the aliens would learn the folly of rousing the human beast. The hard way. On the command deck of the Daxamite flagship, Laros paced before the massive viewport, hands clasped behind his back. The ship's metal floor vibrated with the thrum of the engines. His generals stood at attention, waiting for his orders. A lower-ranking officer burst onto the bridge, nearly tripping in his haste. "Supreme Leader Laros, dire news from the surface." Laros whirled, eyes narrowed. "Report." The officer gulped. An entire platoon wiped out by a single human. "What?" Laros's voice was low, dangerous. "Impossible." "It's true. The soldier appeared immune to our plasma weapons. Here, I have helmet cam footage." Laros snatched the datapad, claws tapping the screen. The video showed a human, dirty and bloodied, striding through plasma fire like it was nothing more than rain. Bolts sizzled against his skin, but he didn't flinch. He reached the Daxamite soldiers, and Laros felt his stomach twist. The human tore through them like they were made of paper, snapping limbs and crushing skulls with horrifying ease. With a snarl, Laros hurled the datapad. It shattered against the wall, spraying bits of glass and metal. He rounded on his generals, teeth bared. "This changes nothing," he spat. "The human is clearly an aberration, a genetic freak. We continue the invasion as planned." The generals saluted, then filed out, boots clicking against the deck. But Laros didn't share their confidence. He waited until the sound of their footsteps faded, then stalked to the comm panel on the wall. He slammed a fist into the large red button. Klaxons blared, red lights pulsing. A robotic voice echoed through the ship. Prepare Zithrisite missile tubes 1 through 100 to fire. Target, Human Continental Population Centers. Authorization code, Laros Alpha Omega 00. Terminate. Laros heard shouts of confirmation. As the crew rushed to carry out his orders, he turned back to the viewport, gazing at the blue-green planet below. One human may be able to resist the power of the Daxamite army, but an entire species. Laros smiled. A cold, cruel thing. They would see how immune the humans were when 50 megaton plasma-yield warheads rained down on their cities. "Fire when ready," Laros said. He wanted to watch the world burn. George moved through the ruined city like an avenging angel, alien bodies piling in his wake with every block. Daxamite soldiers fell before him, necks snapping and skulls caving as he tore into their ranks. He felt no fatigue, no pain, only the burning need to make them pay. Suddenly the ground bucked and heaved as a chain of massive explosions ripped through the city. Buildings evaporated in blinding flashes of plasma fire. Scorching wind and debris scoured the cratered streets. The shockwave caught George and flung him through the air like a leaf in a hurricane. He smashed through the wall of a collapsed hab block and crashed down in a shower of pulverized concrete. His ears rang like claxons, and his vision swam. He pushed himself to his feet, coughing out a lungful of cloying dust. Staggering to a breach in the wall, George looked out over the colony and froze. A third of the city was gone. Just gone. Only a smouldering crater remained, swirling with ash and embers. More missiles rained down from orbit, their sonic booms rolling over him like artillery. Each impact made the ground shudder, sending more buildings toppling. Smoke and screams filled the air. An animalistic howl built in George's chest, a sound of pure rage and anguish. He knew with grim certainty that this scene was playing out across all the human worlds, entire cities wiped out in an eye blink by Laros's cruel order. Something snapped inside George, the last thread of restraint. Now there was only the crimson fury, the need to rend and tear and make the enemy bleed. He threw back his head and roared his defiance, the sound raw and primal. Then he started running, sprinting headlong towards the Daxamite staging ground, heedless of the carnage and flames. At the landing zone, alien tanks and crawlers disgorged from the bellies of grounded dropships. They surged forward in a grey tide, rolling over the blasted terrain towards the human defense lines. The human forces met them head-on. Artillery shells and rockets flashed out, tearing into the enemy armor and sending geysers of shattered metal erupting from holed hulls. The Daxamite vehicles returned fire with a hellstorm of plasma bolts that melted stone and turned men to ash inside their armor. It was a scene straight out of nightmare. Twisted steel, charred meat, and the unending screams of the maimed and dying, a smoke-choked swathe of hell, played out beneath an uncaring sky. George hit the battle lines at a full run and threw himself into the slaughter with a howl of challenge. He leapt from tank to tank, ripping hatches open and flinging the crews out like rag dolls. Plasma bolts pattered off him as he carved a path of ruin through the enemy armor. A Daxamite heavy tank swiveled its main gun to target George. He lunged forward and grabbed the barrel as it fired, ripping the entire turret assembly free in a scream of shearing metal. George dug his fingers into the hull and heaved, flipping the 60-ton vehicle onto its back with a crash. He hammered on the tank's exposed belly until the armor split, then tore the breach wide open. George plunged his arms into the tank up to the shoulders and wrenched a drive system free from its housing with a savage twist. He pulled the assembly out, servos and tubing dangling from the 300-pound hunk of metal. With a roar, George spun in place, building momentum, and then hurled the makeshift projectile into the churning treads of a Daxamite crawler. The massive tread snapped, and the crawler's nose dipped, ploughing into the rubble and crushing the front turret gunner beneath it. Plasma fire sizzled against George's skin as alien infantry swarmed towards him. He barely felt the blistering heat as he smashed into their ranks, breaking bodies with every blow. His vision tunneled down to a narrow field of red ruin, his universe contracting to the rhythm of impact and crunching bone. George stood alone in the heart of the enemy forces, gore-splattered and ringed by shattered corpses. He threw his head back and howled to the barren skies above, an inarticulate sound of challenge and pain. He knew it was hopeless, that his world was already lost, but he would make the Daxamites pay for every inch of ground, every human life. He would make them drown in their own blood. With a snarl, George turned and started towards the grounded dropships at the end of the landing zone. On the command deck of the Daxamite flagship, Laros gripped the arms of his throne, claws digging into the polished metal. The deck shuddered beneath him as human railgun rounds pummeled the ship's shields. Alarms blared and red lights flashed, painting the bridge in shades of blood and fire. "Report!" Laros snapped, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. The sensor officer swallowed hard, eyes glued to his console. "Our shields are failing, Supreme Leader. The human weapons are too powerful. We can't—" Another volley of railgun fire slammed into the flagship, throwing Laros from his seat. He crashed to the deck, pain lancing through his shoulder. Cursing, he hauled himself upright, talons scrabbling for purchase on the smooth metal. The tactical display flickered, its hollow image distorted by static. But through the interference, Laros could see the human cruiser carving a path of destruction through the heart of his fleet, railguns flashing like strobe lights in the void. A spread of torpedoes leapt from the cruiser's launch tubes, corkscrewing through the black. They slammed into a Daxamite destroyer's unshielded hull and detonated, the shaped charges punching deep into the ship's innards before exploding. The destroyer heaved, its back breaking, and then burst apart in a spray of metal and fire. Laros snarled, his eyes narrowing to slits. The humans had tricked him, goading his ships into exhausting their power reserves, and now the Daxamite fleet was exposed, caught out of formation and unable to repel the human onslaught. He opened his mouth to order a retreat, to salvage what he could of this disastrous battle. But before the words could leave his lips, a lance of brilliant light speared through the flagship from bow to stern. The deck bucked beneath Laros's feet, throwing him into a bulkhead with bone-crushing force. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the air filled with the acrid stench of burning insulation. Laros pushed himself up on trembling arms, his head ringing. A klaxon shrieked, the sound drilling into his skull like a living thing. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his thoughts. Then the antimatter containment failed. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the flagship burst apart in a sun-bright fireball, a miniature supernova blooming in the void. The explosion ripped the ship to atoms, sending fragments of hull plate pinwheeling through the silent black. Laros had just enough time to register a chunk of molten metal hurtling towards the viewscreen, before the world dissolved in a maelstrom of light and fury. George stood amidst the shattered remnants of the Daxamite invasion force, gore-splattered and swaying on his feet. The once verdant fields of Zeta Prime were now a charnel house, the earth churned to mud by the treads of alien tanks and the blood of the fallen. Above, the sky was alight with the afterglow of the orbital battle, the death throes of the Daxamite armada as it was torn asunder by vengeful human ships. Flaming wreckage rained down like meteorites, streaking across the darkening firmament. George knew he should feel elation at this hard-fought victory, but all he felt was a numb, hollow ache in his chest. The price had been too high. Zeta Prime's cities lay in ruins, its people scattered and broken. And for what? Survival? Revenge? The concept seemed meaningless in the face of such devastation. A flicker of movement caught George's eye, and he spun, muscles tensing, ready to face another Daxamite straggler. But it was a human soldier, armor scorched and pitted, limping through the corpse-strewn field. The man raised a weary hand in greeting, a haggard smile splitting his soot-blackened face. "We did it, sir," he rasped. "We won. The Daxamites are in full retreat." George could only nod, his throat too raw to form words. The soldier's smile faded as he took in the scene of carnage surrounding them, the thousands of twisted bodies carpeting the once fertile ground. "But what now?" he asked, voice hollow. "How do we come back from this? How do we rebuild?" I don't know, George answered honestly, each word heavy as a tombstone. I don't have any easy answers, but we'll find a way forward. We have to, for the sake of all those who sacrificed. He trailed off, gaze distant. In his mind's eye he could see the faces of the fallen human and Daxamite alike. So many lives snuffed out, so much potential lost forever to the pitiless void. In the distance, a mournful howl rose over the crackling flames and distant explosions. A lone wolf, crying out to an uncaring sky. The sound sent chills down George's spine, an eerie requiem for a world forever changed. Overhead, the shattered hulks of Daxamite warships continued their fiery descent, like the hands of a dying god clawing at the heavens. Streaks of fire tore across the darkening firmament, fading into the smoke-choked sky. The two soldiers stood amidst the smouldering wasteland that had once been a paradise, watching the pyres of their enemies blaze against the coming night. The war was finally over. But the scars it left behind would linger for generations to come. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.